Hello, Neil from Diagonal Move here. Today we have a component overview for Awakening the Bear, which is Operation Barbarossa in 1941, part of the Conflict of Heroes series from Academy Games, designed by Uwe Eichhardt. The game is the second edition of this particular game. The original came out quite some time ago now. It's something of an older game. This edition came out, I believe, 2013, 2014, so about 10 years ago. And I think there has since been a third edition, but this is what we have, and this is what we're going to look at today. I managed to pick this one up pre-loved, so what you see in here is as I've purchased it myself, may not necessarily be reflective of what was in the original box when it was first released some years ago. In addition to this box, though, I do also have the Conflict of Heroes solo expansion for the Eastern Front as well, which we'll go through during this video as well. Okay, so let's have a quick flick onto the back of the box and see what this game is all about. Well, it's 1941. The Germans are invading through the Soviet Union and the Ukraine, and the game is a tactical representation of that particular period of history. The game box here has some actual size counters, so it looks like some nice chunky counters. We have a number of awards that it won. It is a very highly regarded game as far as I understand it, and some blurb here about the game intending to be fun, easy to learn, easy to play, but historically accurate, and essentially a tactical game that's aimed more at the beginner end of the scale of players, as far as I understand. The information here details some of the changes from the first edition to this edition, and talking about different maps and the different counters that were involved and different action cards and things. I do not know what the differences are between this edition and the third edition, so I can't comment on that, but it certainly looks like, or from the blurb anyway, they seem to have been quite a upgrade from the first to the second. Game itself can be played by between 2 to 4 players, 13 plus, and takes between 1 and 3 hours. Scenario based tactical combat game. So we'll look at the solo expansion in a moment, so I'll just move that to one side and take a look at what's inside the main game. First up we have this rulebook, which is showing signs of use in this particular copy that I have, but nevertheless it's in pretty good order, really considering the age of the game. The text is fairly small, but has lots of examples. All the text in red is actually an example of how to use the previous rule or the text above it. So we have sort of an introduction, a talk about the game structure and progression, the sequence of play, set up, that kind of thing. And not very many rules really, because as you can see for this page here, half of the page is actually an example. So even though it's quite small print and it's quite dense, it does look like the actual rules are quite slim. It goes through the victory points, the actions you can take, different actions including opportunity actions, command actions, and how you spend action points and things like that in order to do things, is what I understand. There's information there about the terrain, so another half page worth of terrain description. Then we move into movement and the effects on movement, roads, walls, facing, presumably for the counters. Then we have reinforcements, line of sight, all those kind of things that you would typically expect to see, and then some hit markers. So it's all pretty good, pretty straightforward for a tactical game, certainly by today's standards. And then there's some more information here around stacking, rallying of units, short ranges, long ranges, that kind of thing. But what I really like is the game actually tells you here that those previous 4 or 5 pages are everything you need to know to start playing the first couple of scenarios, which I think is great. You can get going without needing to know all the superfluous information that would be slowly introduced throughout the rest of the scenarios. And so these basics get you started straight away, and I really like that. I can't think of another war game I've played that does that. And so I'm really quite keen to get started and just see just what extra is added in by the other scenarios, because we have Section 2, which is scenarios presumably 3, 4 onwards, we have action cards, talks about shared activations, group movement, group actions. We flip the page, and then there is also things like group firing, hidden units, and then we're ready to play Firefight 3, and Section 3 then deals with hills and steep terrain, blind spots, and slowly layers on those more complex rules. And as you progress, you do end up learning the game in stages, and so you're not diving head first into quite a detailed game. And I suppose that really does reflect the beginner-friendly approach of the game. But anyway, the rules are there. We keep going in sections. So we have Section 5, which is Firefights 6 onwards, Section 6, and then finally the solitaire play. Now, what I like about this is not only do you have the dedicated solo expansion, but if you don't have that, because obviously that's also quite an old release now, you do have a guide to playing solitaire, which is something primarily a solo player that I would always look for in a tactical game, particularly if I at all can. Okay. And at the back here, we just have the counters for the game, sort of a counter breakdown and a breakdown of the cards. Okay, so let's have a quick look at some of those firefights, which is in this book. And so there's a little bit of historical detail there about Operation Barbarossa itself. And then we have the first few small scenarios talking about partisans, the number of rounds that you have, German military forces against the partisans, it seems. NKVD defending at Mir is Firefight 2. Firefight 3 is near the Bug River, and talks about the 24th, 262nd Infantry of the 17th Army. And as you can see, the game slowly starts to layer on the complexity and also the size of the map, and we'll get onto those in a minute, but there's a modular map with this, which I think is really neat. Okay, we have General Petrov, early December for Firefight 5, which is Red Ice. That's the 3rd Panzer Army north of Moscow. There's monster tanks, I think. It's called the Monsters anyway, Firefight Mission 6. And then Firefight 7 is about a bunker. Presumably you have to take some sort of armoured position. Haven't read into these too closely. We have the Mzensk pocket. Apologies if that's horribly pronounced. And then we have sort of quite a large, lengthy map there in order to play that game. And keep going. I'm not sure how many scenarios are in here, but it looks like there's quite a few. We have 9, 10, more and more counters and more maps being used for these different things. It looks like potentially number 11 is the regular. Oh no, 13 and 12. Wow, there are tons. There are absolutely tons of scenarios in here. We're at 15, and finally, it does look like number 16 is the final scenario. You can tell I didn't read that too closely before I shot this video. But yeah, tons and tons of things in here, presumably setting itself up to a pretty good amount of replayability there. Additionally, in the box, we have the usual sorts of summary sheets here. We've got a player aid with turns, round sequence, general gameplay information, terrain, key, and effects on the back. 2 copies of that. There are 3 copies of the player track sheet. I think it's 3, may even be 4, can go with the player count. And on here one side we have the round numbers, the VPs, command and action point track. They are blank on the back. And yeah, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. A few other bits and bobs before we get to the board. There's that's just a protective cover. There's a little note there from the producers around the development of the 2nd edition. And here we have what I think is a home printed addendum to the rules. It says line of sight rules addendum for conflict of heroes. So presumably there was some sort of errata that was published, and this is the previous owner of this game's printout is included in the box. It's very nice of them. And then we do have these maps. Now I'm going to move these maps out a little bit and get some of them out on the board, because even though the maps themselves are not super big, they do take up quite a bit of space when you have them all laid out. This first one is actually single-sided, so it's blank on the back, but we have a few different bits and bobs, and these can all fit together to create a modular style map. So for example, we could fit together like that. Presumably you can also fit them different configurations like so. The scenarios themselves will give you details of what the map configuration is, but it's just a really nice kind of not super thick board, but they are nice game boards that you can use to play your game on. And as you can see, there are 4 or 5 of these in here. I think it's 5. So we have 5 single-sided maps that can be configured in multiple different ways. The artwork is pretty good. And a bit of a close-up, I guess, on the artwork and also the hexes. We have, hard to see in the glare there, but we do have quite small hex numbers. The hexes themselves are pretty chunky. I mean, we're talking sort of that big. But the bit of glare from the light behind me and the hex numbers themselves are quite small, so it's obviously quite faint. I don't know if that's purely faded through use or whether it's actually that faint when it was first released, but that's potentially something to bear in mind when you're playing this under artificial light. And the final map board though is this this sort of town or village complex here. Artwork is really cool. So aside from that potential issue with glaring, which may be my light more than anything, it's actually a really kind of cool set of maps. And now we come on to the counters. Now this counter tray, I'm going to plonk on the top there, this does come included with the game. So it fits into the box really snugly. I can only assume that all these empty spaces are there for expansions that may or may not have been released over time. As far as I can tell, everything is here. There just seems to be a fair amount of spare space for other stuff. So we do have a couple of dice. There are cards of varying types that I've separated out just to keep them apart. And so here we have sort of, well, you can see different cards that presumably do different things. I don't know what the differences are between them all right now, but presumably they're add-on items. We have sort of objectives, luck and extra turn type cards there. And then here we have what I believe are command type cards that one assumes you play during the game to do certain things. Some of them have a cost on them. 2 points for that one, 0 for the one at the top there. And the artwork is what appears to be historical imagery taken during the time. Images themselves being repeated a few times across the different cards. But it's nice and clear, easy to see, a few different things on there. So they should add a little bit of extra something to the hex encounter style gameplay. Onto the counters, and we have a bunch of markers. I probably won't go through every single one of these. There's absolutely loads of them. Like these things here look like explosions. There we go. Yeah, they're status markers: pinned, stunned, berserk, that kind of thing. These ones here look like they're probably vehicle rack markers because you've got the exploded tank silhouette there. These are silhouettes and immobilized panic. These are presumably status markers for the vehicles. There's other markers. I can only assume that's the turn marker. Command and control type counters. Let's grab a few of them. You have different command points presumably, and then control. One assumes they're used for different VP locations. These look a little bit like terrain features that you might add onto the map. Looks like a trench or something there, with a bunker on the other side, more terrain type stuff. I think that's fallen logs, maybe a roadblock or something, some barbed wire, various other things, each with different numbers on them, which presumably represents different defensive modifiers and things like that. Not entirely sure what everything means and all the counters. There's a fair few numbers dotted around these things, as you would expect from this type of game, so we'll figure that out as I play it. But you know, those numbers are dead easy to see. Glare from my bright light there aside, and they're sort of, we have mines and various other things as well. Last of the status style markers are what look to be smoke. Maybe they block line of sight or something. They are double-sided, presumably with a reducing effect as you play them. There's different values on both sides. Then we move on to the counters themselves, or the unit counters, and we'll start with the Germans, which is just here. These counters are really nice. They're super thick, super chunky. We have sort of trucks, horse and cart there on that one, and more trucks. So sort of these are like the transport type counters. They do have all these different markers on them, different effects. Each one has its vehicle type listed, or indeed in the case of some of them they're artillery type. Here we have artillery counters, varying types of field artillery. The counters are double-sided. I'm not sure what the difference between the sides are. That looks exactly the same on both sides, apart from the pink stripe. The symbol at the top there, the green arrow, and with the white arrow, that is the facing, I assume. So we decide which way they're pointing their gun. Moving on to more support type units, we have tank hunter units and mortars. There are heavy machine guns, that kind of thing on these counters. Again, double-sided with pretty clear, easy to see numbers. Moving on, we come across some vehicles, and plenty of vehicles in this game. There's different types of armoured car, what look to be light tanks or AFV type things. I'm afraid I don't know what the German is for an armoured car. I'm sure somebody would be able to tell me, but there's plenty of those in there. And then we have sort of the main event, I guess, the tanks themselves. So sort of a tank there I've never heard of called the Sumua S35. There's the T-34, presumably that's a captured T-34, as well as a whole bunch of others, and then the sort of the famous Panzers and Panzer IVs and things like that. Panzer III's there as well. So tons and tons of tanks for anyone who's a tank aficionado. Panzer Mark II, and a Panzer 38 as well, I think that says. So tons and tons of things for the combined arms enthusiast to get stuck into. The final counters for the Germans are the infantry. And again, it's another whopping great stack of things. And we have things like pioneers, light machine guns of varying types, and then rifle platoons on there as well. So a whole stack of infantry counters alongside the vehicle counters. Soviet is much the same type of thing, except obviously with the relevant units for the Soviet forces. Mortars, field artillery pieces, of different types. There's a few of each for most of these, like maybe one or two for some, but most of them have a couple. Different types of mobile artillery as well, it looks like there. Tank-wise, we have, again, some of the more famous Soviet ones. There's a T-26 there, a BT-7, not heard of that one. And then we have the perhaps the famous T-34s there as well, a bunch of those, and then some KV1s there. Again, the markers pretty easy to see. In terms of how easy they are to differentiate between them, the German counters are not too different. I suppose you can just about tell the difference between those in terms of colour. They are perhaps a bit more similar than you'd like, but yeah, you probably know the difference between those when you were playing, I'm sure. In terms of supply type units, we have trucks, wagons again, and a couple of light armoured cars as well, it seems. Infantry-wise, a bunch of infantry troops again, so the NKVD, the Maxim machine guns, and then the riflemen of different types as well. So yeah, lots of core counters, some cool maps, and what I think maybe some pretty straightforward, easy to follow rules. So that is the base game for Conflict of Heroes Awakening the Bear 2nd edition. I'll clear all this away and get out the solo expansion. The solo expansion for Conflict of Heroes, it does say the Eastern Front. I don't know whether they ever released a Western Front or a Pacific version of this solo expansion, but it is designed by Uwe Eckhart, Gunther Eckhart, and also John Butterfield, it seems, who obviously has a well-known games designer, particularly of solo games. It's quite a big, chunky box. And on the back there, it gives you a bit about the game itself and the fact that this uses essentially a deck of cards as its AI system. There are a number of standalone missions and 2 full campaigns covering the German 1941 advance on Moscow, where you command the German 10th Panzer Division in the first campaign, and then for the second campaign you switch side and command elements of the Soviet 32nd Army. Okay, there's a bunch of different cards in here and some counters, and then various missions as well. Okay, let's open this up and take a quick look. Now I believe this is actually unpunched. This one did appear to be brand new when I bought it, or as close to it as you can get when you buy it pre-loved. So we have the solo missions, but let's first start with the solo rules, shall we? And we have an advert for another game in the series just there. The solo rules, it's the same format as the base game. It's got 2 columns, fairly small text, but with plenty of red text as well, which just gives examples of the previous text, talking about the setup, the different types of cards you have, and really just how to modify the base game in order to play with the AI. Obviously there was the solo guide in the previous base game, but this is a completely different system that came out sometime after the original game. I think this is 2015 maybe, so probably released alongside the 2nd edition itself. So not very many rules. We're on to page 6 here, and we're pretty much at the end. It doesn't have that same kind of these rules so you can play this mission layout, which I was so impressed with about the base game, but presumably if you've played the base game you would have a reasonable idea of how to play it by the time you read this. And then there are some different examples of how to use things. So a cool and relatively rules light solo rulebook there. Solo missions is actually a thicker book, and we have, how many missions do we have? I don't know, I got this wildly wrong when I was doing the base game book. There were significantly more missions than I thought there were. So here we have a solo mission 1, tank hunting for solo mission 2. Yeah, you can sort of see the layouts that you use. Pretty cool full map on that one. That's solo mission 3. Potentially maybe a variation on the Partisans mission from the first book there as mission 4. There's a score sheet for the campaign. and then you have a... Oh, okay, so those early missions were separate. I believe those are standalone missions, and then the campaign follows on after those. So solo campaign missions 1, 2, 3 to 4, and then campaign 2, missions 1 through... I was going to say 1 through 4, but it looks like it's just a couple. Cool. Anyway, plenty to get your teeth into there. What a cool thing to see. Some different campaigns for the solo player. That's always nice to see. In terms of what else is in this box, we have a sheet of counters, big chunky counters. It's not punched. I presume this will come out pretty quick, pretty easily. Some very sort of grey looking counters here. Presumably these are hidden, I'm going to say, or something. Rumoured enemy, so they must be some sort of hidden units. We have what looks like cattle or cows of some kind, presumably to get in the way of line of sight. No enemy counters, and then a couple of VP markers and a mission count timer type marker. Okay, so just the one set of counters to add into that base box. Presumably there were a few more expansions to fill out all the space that was in there. A score record track thing. I want a player aid. Yep, just the one player aid, two-sided. Rules on one side, and then an order instruction flowchart thing for the other side. One of those boxes with a lot of stuff in more space than is needed. We have some errata though to add on to things, so we just need to make sure we keep track of that. And finally we do have the deck of cards. Now this hasn't even been taken out of its cellophane, so I'll do that and come back and look at the cards. We have what appears to be a single deck of cards. They all have what looks like the same back, although I believe you may create two draw piles. Having a quick skim through the rules. On the main side of the card, or the facings of the card, you have a whole bunch of different things. It's essentially a table. You have a heading here which says command order. Now, and not all of the cards have that written on, so presumably there are different types of cards within here. There's a priority box, so that's fairly difficult to see perhaps on the camera, but it's just there. It says priority with some symbols and what to do when, and then tactical, and then a few bits and bobs down at the bottom, presumably instructing you to do certain things at certain times or with certain counters. And so we have these command orders, and they seem to have been packed not in any kind of order in terms of the card numbers along the top there, but in some other order. And then we come into, because we come into cards with which are a different colour on the facing, and have what appears to be superficially similar information, but there's no command order title, and sometimes they have these kind of icons there as well that give you a certain number of instructions back to the command orders. Okay, a few different things. It looks like you've got a line that tells you something to do in general, a line that talks about priority of actions, some things you do, and then some cleanup. That's what it looks like, not having actually read any of the rules, but that's how it appears at first glance. And there are quite a few of these cards actually. There's a whole bunch of them doing different things, talking about firing or disengaging, firing or pivoting or rallying, counter actions, whatever they are, and then yeah, looks like essentially almost a flow chart you follow, almost in card form. Okay, and as I said, there's quite a few of these, well over 50, 55 maybe, judging by that number there. Okay, so that is the engine of the AI system. So all in all then, that is Conflict of Heroes. We have seen the solo expansion, the base game for the second edition. It looks fantastic. The quality is phenomenal, particularly for a somewhat older game now, and It comes highly regarded and even has winner Historical Game of the Year in a big bright logo on the front of the box there. I'm really keen to get this one to the table fairly soon, in quotes. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.